Have you ever received a gift so wonderful, so amazing that it left you speechless? Perhaps some of you had that experience yesterday. When you laid eyes on what was inside of that beautifully wrapped box, your brain and your tongue couldn't quite come together to express how you were feeling. No words could capture the joy inside of your heart of receiving that Hickory Farms cheese and summer sausage platter. And so you just stood there, tears welling in your eyes and a big old goofy grin on your face. It was the perfect gift. This morning we're wrapping up our series, The Christmas Story, and this story is really about a gift given to humanity that exceeds all other gifts. So awed was the Apostle Paul by this amazing gift that he wrote these words in 2 Corinthians chapter 9 and verse 15. Thanks be to God for his indescribable gift. This gift was one that no one in the ancient world ever anticipated. A God completely emptying himself to hang out with ordinary human beings for their benefit. It's too hard to imagine. It's what makes the gift indescribable, is because it was unimaginable. No one saw it coming, but it happened. Jesus, God in flesh, came from heaven to be with us. And for centuries now, poets and preachers and artists and composers and musicians have tried their very best to capture the magnificence of Christ. And every lyric, every sermon, every rendering, every composition has fallen woefully short. And the same will hold true today. And yet I feel compelled to do what I can with my limited intellect and words to try to point us to why the gift of Jesus should leave us with mouth wide open. And really the place that I want to begin is with the words of Jesus' close friend, John. John launches into his story of Jesus by taking a crack at trying to describe the indescribable with these words. John chapter 1, verse 14. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. Has anyone ever accused you of being full of it? Now, I'm guessing that some of you have been accused of that more than others, but I'm not going to name any names this morning. But usually when people say that about us, they're not typically referring to grace and truth, are they? And while that statement can be rude, the person who's making that accusation is not necessarily off basis, is she? I mean, some of us here this morning were full of grace and truth more than others, but none of us are full of grace and truth 100% of the time. Well, we tend to be this mix of grace and stinginess, of truth and falsehood. And this is what makes Jesus so unique, because he was the living, breathing embodiment of grace and truth. Many scholars believe that John had a moment in the life of Moses in mind when he penned these words about Jesus. That moment when Moses had ascended Mount Sinai with a freshly chiseled copy of the Ten Commandments, and God descended in a cloud to show him just a glimpse of his glory. In a cloud, because seeing God in all of his glorious goodness would have been too much for any mortal to actually bear. This cloud covered God as he passed by Moses, showing him a glimpse of who he is. He proclaimed these words about his nature, and he says in Exodus chapter 34 and verse 6 and 7, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger and abounding in love and faithfulness, or you might say abounding in grace and truth, maintaining love to thousands and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. It was this cloud-covered God who came in the flesh to give us a glimpse of grace and truth and to show us how to live grace and truth. As one scholar writes, the incarnation was the full manifestation of truth and grace because it was the greatest possible expression of God's compassion for people and the most perfect way of conveying the truth to their understanding. Page after page of the Gospels, we witness Jesus gift people with grace or undeserved kindness. A leper didn't deserve to be healed, let alone touched, but Jesus did both. A crowd that was in danger of missing dinner didn't deserve a free meal, but Jesus fed them. A tax collector didn't deserve to be asked to join in, but he was invited by Jesus. The Samaritan woman didn't deserve to be recognized, but Jesus struck up a conversation with her. The children didn't deserve to be paid attention to, but Jesus delighted in them. You see, Jesus spent his days blessing people with kindnesses they did not deserve. Of course, his most lavish display of grace was in his final act. And I don't mean to be a downer this morning, but to truly appreciate this indescribable gift that we've received in Jesus, then we must recognize the truth about ourselves. And what is the truth? The truth is we are a people that were created good, in the image of God, but we did not stay good for very long. It was no time before we turned our attention from worshiping God to worshiping ourselves, and then that birthed actions and decisions that ended up being no good. Did that change our identity? No, it didn't change our identity at all. We're still created in the image of God. God's imprint is still all over us. But it sure did mess up our state of being. Instead of enjoying an intimate relationship with God, we became captive to, we became in bondage to the evil one who was set out leading us down this path of destruction and death. And seeing this, though, Jesus, in his ultimate act of undeserved kindness, gave up his life to set us free. Free to enjoy God both now and forevermore. We read these words in Hebrews chapter 2 and verse 14. Because God's children are human beings made of flesh and blood, the Son also became flesh and blood. For only as a human being could he die, and only by dying could he break the power of the devil who had the power of death. December of 2017, the former physician for USA Gymnastics, Larry Nassar, was sentenced to 175 years in prison for sexually assaulting several female gymnasts. When it came her turn to speak, Rachel Denhollander, who courageously brought the abuse to light, shared this powerful statement. She spoke to Nassar these words. You spoke of praying for forgiveness. But Larry, if you've read the Bible you carry, you know forgiveness does not come from doing good things. As if good deeds can erase what you've done. It comes from repentance, which requires facing, acknowledging the truth about what you have done and all of its utter depravity and horror without mitigation, without excuse, without acting as if good deeds can erase what you have seen in this courtroom today. The Bible carries a final judgment where all of God's wrath and eternal terror is poured out on men like you. Should you ever reach the point of truly facing what you have done, the guilt will be crushing. And that is what makes the gospel of Christ so sweet. Because it extends grace and hope and mercy where none should be found. And it will be there for you. I have no idea if Nassar took Rachel's words to heart, but I pray that we do. Our sin may not look as egregious as Nassar's in the eyes of society, but our sin, whatever form it has taken, is ugly. And it's hard to think about, and it's hard to look at our sin because deep down we know the devastation that we've brought into the lives of other people. It's not fun to look at our sin. But until we see our sin for what it is and all of its ugliness, we'll continue to undervalue this indescribable gift that we've received in Jesus Christ. The Apostle Paul refused to do that. The Apostle Paul looked his sin square in the face. He looked at his pride. He looked at his impure thoughts. He looked at his judgmental attitude. He looked at his brutality. He saw it for what it was. And then he came to this conclusion that he was the all-time champ of sinners. And so when he thought about this God who made the decision to pay for rather than punish him for his sins, the conclusion he came to was this: I'm at a loss for words. This gift is simply indescribable. And this gift is yours for the taking if you choose to accept it. It's hard for some of us because deep down what we really want to do is we want to earn it. But Rachel's right. There's nothing that you can possibly do, nothing that I can possibly do to erase all of the harm that we've inflicted upon people and the planet and our God. And so it's in faith that we must humbly take hold of this gift of freedom, this gift of salvation, this gift of life freely given to us in Jesus Christ. Paul emphasizes this point in Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 8 and 9. For it is by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not from yourselves, it is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast, for we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works which God prepared in advance for us to do. Now, please know this morning that this gift is not to be hoarded, it is to be shared. Take note of that. This gift is not to be hoarded, it is to be shared. However, grace seems to be in short supply these days, doesn't it? A recent article in Time magazine entitled, "Why Everyone is So Rude Right Now," Belinda Lupscomb writes these words. She says, the combination of a contagious, life-threatening disease and a series of unprecedented, life-altering changes in the rules of human engagement have left people anxious, confused, and especially if they do not believe the restrictions were necessarily, deeply resentful. And this is an atmosphere which can ruffle even normally very calm people, or in which very slight infractions can set off those with less of a handle on their emotions. We're living in a time of short fuses and quick triggers. Belinda goes on to give an illustration of just where this is being carried out, who's most likely to receive or be on the brunt end of this type of rude behavior. And she points out it's those in the service industry. No surprise, right? It's those who work in restaurants, it's those in the hospitals, it's those that are in hotels, airlines, even churches. In fact, she points out that one restaurant made the decision that they needed to close their doors for 24 hours just so that they could allow their employees to recover from the rude behavior of customers. This morning, as I was kind of going over what I wanted to share this morning, I was sitting looking at a couple of articles, and there was an article this morning, or maybe came out a couple days ago, but I just saw it this morning. Apple had at least 50 employees walk out on Christmas Eve because they said we need better workplace conditions. And one of the things they mean by that is we need greater protection from customers. Evidently, in an Apple store in Florida, a man walked in and he spit in the face of a worker there. That's kind of the atmosphere we're living in today. And we as followers of Jesus, we must lead the way, not just in simply being kind, but in distributing undeserved kindness. Undeserved kindness. That means we are the people. We are the people who choose to tip double rather than bark at our waitress. That means we are the people who choose to wave at the person in the parking lot who zipped in and took our parking space instead of shaking our fist at them. That means that we are the people who wait patiently in the doctor's office rather than badgering the poor receptionist as to why it is taking so long. It means we are the people who listen to other people express their frustrations even though we don't deserve it, and we take it pleasantly and we respond kindly. Now, is this a gift that is easy to give? By no means. Most of the time, I don't feel like extending this gift to anyone else, but we must, because we follow the one who showed us kindness even when we least deserved it. And so this is the people we're called to be. Now, Jesus is full of grace, but he's also full of truth. Since the moment Satan arrived on the scene, he's been working double time to, as Jesus says, to steal, kill, and destroy. This is his intention. Now, one might think that Satan has this really large playbook that he operates from in order to achieve these ends, but he's really not that creative. The evil one tends to operate the same play over and over and over again. And do you know what that play is? That play is simply this. It is to convince you to believe what is not true to be true. That's it. It is to convince you to believe what is not true is true about God, about yourself, about other people, and about the way that the world works. You say, how effective can a person be at running the same play over and over and over again? Well, if you pay attention to what's really going on in the world, if you pay attention to what's going on in things like, or the state of affairs and things like the environment or race or marriage and families or politics or the emotional, physical, and spiritual well-being of most individuals, you know we're a mess. You know that there's a lot of tension, there's a lot of chaos, you know that we're in pain, and it's all because of the lies that we have chosen to believe. Now, here's the good news of Christmas. The good news of Christmas is because God came in flesh, we no longer have to fall for any of these lies of the evil one, because we've been gifted with the truth in Jesus Christ. And if we will live by the truth that Jesus taught and the way that Jesus lived, then our lives are going to come closer to what we've always longed for. In his most recent book entitled Live No Lives, John Mark Comer, he touches on this idea by saying this. We live in a fascinating moment of what the sociologist Philip Reif called anti-culture. Very powerful cultural currents are actively working to take order and make chaos, to undo the order that was passed down to us by previous generations. Now, to clarify, the idea of order has been politicized recently, but please don't think I'm referring to the abuse of order as exemplified by systemic racism or police brutality. I'm not. I'm referring to the time-tested ways of being human that span cultures, continents, and generations, and that have been passed down over millennia to enable each new generation to live in congruence with reality and thrive. Many of these have been thrown out the window in just a few short decades, with little to no research or even an honest exploration of whether or not they are actually true. Keep in mind that what we call traditional values were all radical when Jesus first introduced them. They were eventually adopted as the norm because they are based on a highly sophisticated and deeply wise view of human nature, and frankly, because they work. When we live into Jesus' vision, we thrive. Now, long before John Mark Comer spoke those words, Jesus made this promise about what life will be like for those who center their lives in him. And Jesus said this, Matthew chapter 11, verse 28, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I'm gentle and humble in heart, and you'll find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light." And reflecting upon those words, an author by the name of Brant Hansen writes this. He says, when we pay attention to what he's actually saying, like in the Sermon on the Mount, and actually put his principles into practice, we find life to be more restful. To live in the truth is the key to flourishing and rest. To live in the truth of Jesus is the key to flourishing and peace. Let's go with peace and rest. And this is why peace continues to be so elusive for many of us. We are living a lie. To quote John Mark Comer again, he says, "The problem is less that we tell lies and more that we live them. We let false narratives about reality into our bodies, and they wreak havoc in our souls. So here's the question this morning. What lies are you living that are keeping you from the full life that Jesus came to gift you with? What lies are you living about yourself? I'm not lovable. I'll never be happy. I deserve to be alone. What lies are you living about God? God's distant. God's not that interested in me. God's holding out on me. His words are mere suggestions. What lies are you living about the way the world works? My thoughts don't really matter. My actions don't have consequences. My associations don't have influence. If I could encourage you to do one thing this week as we head into a new year, it'd be simply this. Take 30 minutes, take an hour, and write down every lie that you're currently living and replace that lie with the truth of Jesus Christ. Because I promise you, every lie that you're living, it has a counterpoint that Jesus is going to speak to. So identify the lie and then look for the truth. And if you're not sure what the truth is, then feel free to speak to somebody else. Give me a call, give one of the elders a call, give somebody else a call. Sometimes an outsider can look at that lie and say, oh yeah, okay, we see the lie. Here's the truth. Sometimes they see the truth quicker than we can see it ourselves. I know that's been beneficial for me, is to have somebody else say, oh, that's the lie, Sean. Here's the truth. And it makes all the difference in the world. You see, listen to the words of Jesus in John chapter 8 and verse 31 and 32. To the Jews who had believed him, Jesus said, if you hold to my teaching, you're really my disciples. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Free to flourish, free to rest, free to bring glory to the God who came for us. Jesus, God in flesh, full of grace and truth, a gift that goes beyond description.